on now to looking at the performance report from the force, and we're going to start with something which I know is very topical, and I've already had some comments in from the public this morning around. There was a story in the Times today looking at some of the official stats that were released last Thursday. So, Chief Constable, if I could ask you specifically about some of these solved outcome numbers and rates, and specifically in relation to burglary, which I know that people are really worried about. And unfortunately, according to the Times, Surrey is not doing very well. I wonder if you could tell us what plans are in place to improve it and how we can give the public a bit more confidence that Surrey Police really are working very hard to fix this problem.
Yeah, good morning, Commissioner. Thank you. And yes, there's been quite a bit in the media recently about crime figures and crime solve rates. So perhaps just set that in a little bit of context first of all. So there are three things that you may see reported in the media, and indeed if you look at the public performance report from today that will give an outline of. So there's police recorded crime statistics, which then feed into the Office for National Statistics, or sometimes the ONS statistics that people talk about. And then there's also the Crime Survey of England and Wales, which is, as it sounds, a survey measure of people's experiences of crime. And sometimes that gives them different stats, but hence different recording method. The first thing to say is that Surrey Police remain the fourth safest county in England and Wales and the safest county in the southeast. And in terms of residential burglary, that decreased nationally by 19% over the last 12 months. But in Surrey, we saw a 35% decrease in burglary. So it's some of the lowest levels of burglary that I've ever seen in my almost 30 years of service. So pleased to say that it is a safe place. However, as your question outlined, we've got an awful lot of work to do in terms of solving more crime for our communities. So in the last year, we solved 74 fewer burglary offences than previously. Which results in a very low solve rate for Surrey of about 3.5%, which of course is nowhere near what we would want to do for our communities. There are a few reasons behind this drop off, and of course we will see when we go into later parts of the performance report that this drop off on solving crime is something that is a challenge to police services nationally and certainly to here in Surrey. But specifically on burglary, some of the reasons why. The way that we collect forensic and digital evidence now is changing. Burglary offenders are very smart at not leaving a trace behind. One of the ways that they too sometimes leave a trace is a digital footprint rather than a physical forensic footprint. On the physical forensic side, that's very well regulated and soon to be accredited now, and we've received favourable reports from the regulator on our progress on that. And we have recently, on the digital side, set up a digital investigation support unit. So this is a team of highly skilled people who are able to help investigators recover any digital evidence that might be associated with that crime offence. So, for example, if a vehicle is stolen as part of that burglary, then download from the electronics of the vehicle as to what investigative opportunities that might clear up. So a lot more that we've got to do on digital forensics. We also know that during the pandemic that one of our successful routes for burglary detections is to talk to those that we have arrested and imprisoned for burglaries and do what we call prison interviews, prison clear up. Sometimes you might see it reported as. Of course, none of that has been able to happen during the pandemic because we've not been able to get into the prisons during that time. I guess the other thing to recognise is that in these statistics, residential burglary does include sheds. So these are not always break-ins to people's homes that we're talking about. It's to sheds and outbuildings as well. That's a common feature of the offending across Surrey. And one of the things that we sometimes rely upon for these investigations is to be able to look at series and patterns and trends. Because the numbers have been very low in comparison to what we've seen before, sometimes those trends and series are not easy to spot in the intelligence analysis. They appear as sort of, you could argue, sort of random occurrences. I mean, we do sometimes pick out series and trends. Often it's those series and trends that then lead us to the identification of offenders through use of automatic number plate recognition, patterns of vehicle movements, as the deputy was saying on the rural crime, reports of suspicious activity that come into us, and that will give us that initial lead. So identifying those series has been a little bit harder during the pandemic. Just a few things on what we're doing to try and tackle these issues. So we've launched a force-wide initiative called Operation Falcon. That's a big part of our investigation improvement programme. Involves very close scrutiny of the investigative standards on offences, some principles that we're asking the investigators to follow. We've recently introduced in November of last year a prison investigation team in custody to provide more rigorous custody investigation procedures with specialist teams that will be rotated through there to get their skills up. We're running some focus group activity with investigators to find out from their perspective what their obstacles to solving more crime are. And we've also volunteered to be part of two national studies conducted by the Home Office, who of course are interested in what's happening nationally on this issue. So there's some specific group work looking at the blockages in the criminal justice system, which we're involved in, and why matters are not progressing through Crown Prosecution Service and into the court system. And we're also doing some activity-based analysis with another 8 forces nationally to look down at the sort of fine detail of what the police activities are and whether they prove successful or not in clearing up work. So we recognise there's a lot to do. We recognise that it's not giving our communities the service they absolutely deserve in terms of solving more crime, but just set in the context that it is still one of the safest counties in England and Wales, and we have seen a much bigger decrease in burglary than the national statistics as well. I think yes, thanks, Commissioner.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And the context is, of course, incredibly useful. But of course, what the public will say is, what about them? What about if they are burgled and somebody comes into their home or their shed or their garage? And whilst statistics are helpful, and I think we can all understand that they do help to put things in context, it doesn't help an individual resident. So what would you say to an individual resident who has been burgled and they dial 999 or they dial 101? What is going to happen for them?
So we will attend. So we will attend residential burglaries, of course, and burglary is one of those offences that is almost universally reported to us. So we don't see a drop off in burglary reporting. The only times that burglaries sometimes are not reported to police is when it's a burglary between rival criminal gangs. So, for example, if they're stealing commodities or cash from each other, then sometimes they're not reported to us. But generally, residential burglaries are fully reported to us. So please do keep doing that. You can expect a good response. We will survey you for your views on how we've quickly we've responded, what the quality of service is that you get when you get there, whether we keep you updated, whether you think the action we've taken has been effective or not. We do that via a text message survey, and the views that you give us are fed back to the individual investigators. So they will get your feedback on whether you feel that they've given you a good service or not. Typically in those satisfaction measures, we see low to mid 60% satisfaction. Clearly room for improvement in that. The areas where our communities tell us that they would like us to do better is in keeping them informed on the progress of investigations and in the practical action that's taken. And for that, it's exactly what we've been talking about. People want to see the offenders being brought to justice for the offences that they commit, and where that doesn't happen, clearly that's going to hit the satisfaction score. So you can expect a really good standard of service for us at the scene to follow those investigative leads. And my colleagues want nothing more to be able to clear up these crimes and keep the county safe. In fact, I was just discussing with the deputy this morning that we're at an unusual period in policing, in that all through my service, the volume of burglary, so the amount of burglary going on in an area, is normally correlated with whether or not you're being successful in securing offenders and locking them up. So if you identify the right offenders and get them in prison, generally your burglary rate goes down. we've broken that trend in the pandemic. So burglary rate is down significantly, but so is the volume of clear up. I've never seen that before in my career. So this is it's a real challenge for us, but one that we're determined to do much better at.
That's good, yeah, and we know that, of course, we have seen problems with the criminal justice system and court backlogs, which is affecting everybody. We all recognise that during the pandemic, obviously, burglary went down massively across the country, and it's not a huge surprise that it went down even more in Surrey, given how many residents of Surrey commute into London normally and therefore have been able to work from home. With the country largely now going back to offices and going back to work, there will obviously be more empty properties in Surrey, and so is it reasonable, first of all, to expect the burglary rate to rise, and secondly, are Surrey police resourced and equipped in order to deal with that rise?
So we would expect some increase. We've already had some recent arrests of foreign national offenders, which those that have tuned into these performance meetings in years gone by will know 3 or 4 years ago we had a significant series throughout the southeast from foreign national offenders. Where the proceeds of the burglary were making their way back overseas. That led to a big joint operation with police forces throughout the southeast and our colleagues in London as well. We've had some arrests recently, again, of a similar sort of series where organised criminals target particular postcode areas. So we would expect offences like that to increase, and that's where we work heavily on the intelligence and that and digital investigation that I mentioned, automatic number plate recognition and so on. In local boroughs and districts, I know our borough and district commanders have been doing lots of preventative work as well. So commend what's been happening over on Surrey Heath, for example. Alec James, the inspector over there, did a big problem-solving initiative on burglary with some real practical helps and tips. So, for example, having a bin buddy. So we know that burglaries can be correlated with people not taking their bins back in. Very simple thing. Get yourself a bin buddy. Make sure you've got a neighbour if you're not going to be back that's going to take your bin back in for you. Lighting and movement in the house, all really important. In my home, I have an automated lighting system. Not very expensive now to be able to install those things. Can switch lighting off on a sort of random pattern, make the house look occupied if I'm not there. If you can afford it, get yourself a decent alarm that's serviced annually. That will reduce your insurance premium as well if you do that. All of those things really do help.
That's great, Chief Constable. Thank you. I'm going to move on now to another issue.